each one of us have an emotional starting place, a place of origin, our origin story as it relates to our emotions. How do you think that you have become aware of, or how have you determined how you think about or what emotions mean to you? In other words, where did your idea about the feeling of happiness come from? Where did your idea, or where does your idea about the feeling of fear come from? How do you determine love and what that means to you? How do you determine sadness and what it means to experience sadness? Where you start from in your emotion journey has a tremendous influence on how you experience your emotions and how you experience emotions within a relationship. Most of a person's emotions occur in the context of relationships. And that's why we're talking about emotions in the relationship context, because most of the emotions that we experience, most of the emotions that we have to regulate, most of our feelings are managed and generated and are a part of our relationships. Because we're relationship beings, we feel one another. That's important to understand, because as you're experiencing life, most of your emotions are going to center around being in relationship with someone. People operate from different emotional starting places, what I call their EKB, or their emotion knowledge base. Their EKB, their emotional knowledge base, is the starting place from which they began to learn about emotions. And so if you think about it, right, we each have different emotion starting places. Where you've started from is going to be directly correlated with how well you navigate emotionally in your relationships. So think about your starting place, your EKB, your emotional knowledge base. Where does it come from? There are three factors that influence your EKB, your emotional knowledge base. Factor number one, your parents, mom and dad. Whoo! Can we talk about it? We will talk about that in just a few moments. The second factor of your EKB, your emotional knowledge base, comes from your culture. I am now specifically referring to race, ethnicity, your culture that you grew up in, whether you're from the North or from the South or from Europe or from Africa. Your culture has an emotional, shall we call them emotional rules, right? That we all learn because we're all born into a family, moms, dads, siblings, parents, but we're also all born into a particular culture. And that culture is very important in our emotional knowledge base. And then the third factor that most definitely makes up your EKB is your life experiences. What's been unique to you? What have past or previous relationships taught you about fill in the blank, love and trust and all the things that we feel in relationships? What have your life experiences taught you about feelings? We all have different starting places. I cannot stress this enough, because every relationship that you are in, you're at a level, they're at a level, and we start from different places. Our parents, our culture, our life experiences, and the events that happen to us. Those three things are very, very important. But it's also very, very important for us to flesh out how those things have truly impacted our emotional starting places. So let's do that now. I want you to describe in detail how each one of these factors influenced your understanding of emotions, starting with your mother. So here's how my mom influenced me emotionally. And I'm going to actually start with a story about my grandmom. One of the last times that I visited my grandmom in Watley, Alabama, oh my gosh, love my grandmom to death. We were just me and her in her front room talking. And I was saying to her, I was like, Grandma, your children. Now, I talked to my grandmom about her kids, obviously my mom, my aunts, my uncles, and she talked right along with me. And I said, you know what, your kids, I don't understand why they keep so much drama going in the family. Here's what my grandmom says. Yeah, it's like they're walking around and around and around and around the lake, but nobody's ever going to get in and nobody's going to ever talk about it. And I said, well, Grandma, why don't you get your kids, talk to them, have them hash this out? She's like, girl, I'm not going to do that. Why don't you go ahead on and do that? What's the point of the story? The point is, my grandma refused to deal with emotional issues. Consequently, my mother refused to deal with emotional issues. And right, you guessed it, for a long time, I refused to deal with emotional issues. Emotions, from my mom's perspective and what I learned, they're to be stuffed. They're not to be talked about. They're not to be expressed unless they're of a negative nature. And where'd she learn that? From her mom. And then I'm going to guess that my grandmom learned it from her mom, et cetera, et cetera. Your mother has played a role in your life, maybe not like mine. Maybe your mom was very expressive and taught you to be the same way, but I want you to describe that. Write it down. Think about the impact, what you learned, how you were socialized emotionally by your mother. The next person up, obviously, we've got to talk about pops, right? We've got to talk about our fathers. I've already given you a clue on mine, but I want you to think about it. And that's in module 1. And I've talked about it a little bit here. So you want to think about the fact that your father, whether he expressed emotions or didn't, whether he expressed only one type of emotion or one category of emotions or several, he has influenced how you view emotions. If he just wasn't even present, that told you something. That informs your emotions in a way that you need to be aware of. Describe the role, the impact that you feel that your father has had on how you view emotions. Are you expressive or not expressive? Do you hug? Do you cry? Did your father do the same? What did you learn from dear old dad? The next category is culture. This is something we don't talk about here in the United States of America, and I am bent. I want to, before I die, see America have a conversation that is culturally relevant as it relates to our emotions. Because even if we are all here in America or other parts of the world, our culture has informed how we feel about things, life, people, the way to behave, the way to express. Each one of our cultures is rich with an emotional heritage. Now, my father was from the Caribbean. My mother was from the good old South here in the United States of America. Together, they were volatile. And the culture that they brought us into was a Caribbean Black American culture. And you better believe emotions had a part to play. My father, with his heritage from the Caribbean, from the island of Antigua, had a very definitive emotional style, if you will, about him. And my mother, being from the South, that I just told you, with a grandmom who refused to deal with the emotions, issues, just sat there like in the middle of a lake, and we're just walking around them, looking at them. Oh, combine those two together, and you can only imagine what kind of culture I was brought into. Caribbean, very emotional, very expressive, and then a mom who wasn't. And so I had this cultural mix, and then add into that being a Black American and what that meant when I was growing up and what it means now. We've got a cauldron that is just full of emotion information that has impacted you. Write about that. Describe what your culture was. It Italian? Was it French, Haitian? Was it French, Paris? Was it other parts of the world? In Africa, an African, a Kenyan perspective, South African perspective, South American, Brazil. What has your culture, Canadian, West Coast, East Coast, North, South, what has your culture taught you about emotions? And then finally, since you've been born, guess what? You've experienced emotions yourself. You've had experiences. You've had events that have happened, situations, circumstances that have informed you on how to be emotionally. What are some of the significant things that you can think of, that really resonate with you and how you view emotions? I know for me, because I grew up with this really strange way of understanding the emotion of love. It wasn't good. So when I got married, a good part of the first decade of our marriage, I was trying to figure out this thing called love. I had so many experiences that told me so many wrong things. I had to work that out. Life experiences didn't teach me well as it related to love, and I had to unlearn, to relearn, to be in a loving relationship. What have your life experiences taught you, good and bad? Because those things have factored in to how you function emotionally. Have fun, be intentional, dig through in this inventory, because you want to have a really good handle, as best you can right now, on how your mother, your father, your culture, and your life experiences have impacted your emotional knowledge base. So tell me this, how do you feel about your emotion starting place, your emotional knowledge base? What do you think about the factors that your parents or culture or even your life experiences have had on how you think about or view or determine your emotions? When I did this exercise, especially because I've been reading and doing the research for several years now, I realized, whoa, had I known the impact or had the opportunity to think about the impact that my mom, my dad, my culture, and my life events have had on how I view my emotions, mind blown. It would have saved years of hassle. And I just had a tool to even think about these things. So I'd like for you to evaluate. This information is priceless. It is so valuable because to have it, now you can begin to implement strategy around how to make your emotional understanding even greater, so that you can have more control, so that you can regulate your emotions, so that you can express them appropriately. Now that you've had the opportunity to review your emotional knowledge base and the factors that contributed to your starting place, your emotion origin story, what are you going to do with the information? Specifically, I want to know, what will you do to integrate what you've learned about your EKB into your life right now? If it were me and I had the beginnings of an understanding about how my mother, my father, my culture, my life experiences, if I had an idea, if I were where you are right now, I know I would instantly then go back and I would look at and evaluate individual relationships just like we've done. And I would say, what influence from my mom do I see in this relationship? What influence from my dad do I see? What influence have my life experiences taught me that have contributed to the emotional satisfaction or lack thereof in individual relationships? I would take the pieces, put them together, and really begin to get a better picture of who I am as I relate to others and how these relationships that I am in, how satisfying they are. What factors have other things influenced in that particular relationship? In other words, what impact has my mom or my dad or my culture or my life experiences have on how I view or how I feel about my relationships? All of these pieces work together, but now you've got the tools. So you've got to get the hammer, the nails, and you've got to start gluing and building a new emotion house, if you will, for each relationship. But we're not going to leave you hanging. I'm going to give you the practical steps to build emotionally satisfying relationships.